Hi, everyone. Really excited to be part of this panel and talking to amazing designers in the region. And I think we have about like 40 minutes. So we're going to start off. I think this panel is about successful change management, right? Beyond the tech stack. I'm joined here by Aditi, Mike Dickinson, and Praful Polar. Guys, please introduce yourself. Aditi, let's start with you.
Hi everyone, I'm Aditi and I'm a UX manager at Shopify. Happy to be here, excited to talk about this topic. I think it's very close to my heart.
Mike?
Hey, I'm Mike, Chief Product Officer for Brankas. I'm based in Singapore. We're solving for open banking in Southeast Asia. Hopefully I can elaborate on some of the COVID challenges that we went through, as well as challenges in previous roles at other companies as well. So happy to share.
Great. Praful.
Hey, hi guys. Praful Pudar, Director Product Management, part of the OLX Group. Within the OLX Group, working specifically for a business unit called OLX Autos. Essentially, we're trying to create a car buying and selling experience in some of the emerging markets across the world. Really excited to be part of this panel and share some of my learnings, observations, do's and don'ts from all change management from startups as well as enterprises that I've seen through in my career. Thanks for having me.
Great. And as your panel host, I'm Izwan Ismail. I'm a design head for a regional bank based out of Malaysia. Also the founder of UX Malaysia, and previously I've run my own company in the design space. So let's talk about change management. I think it's an interesting topic. Each and every one of us have gone through some form of change. And Aditi, your previous talk was talking about the storm and being in the change itself. What say you about change management? Let's start at the very top of it.
I worked in startups and large companies, and I think it's different in based on the size of the company that you're working in and the size of your team and the market that you're in. But yeah, it's always hard, and it's about the people and not just about the processes. I think sometimes people focus on the process part of change management when actually it's a lot about the human part. I guess overall change can't be avoided, as I mentioned in my talk. The best thing that we can do is figure out as leaders what our kind of defaults are when we are in a really tough situation, and practice how we can get better with our default reactions to that change.
Yeah, and speaking of changes, right, Praful, you've been through quite a bit of change yourself. OLX Group pivoting and changing ideas. And recently your talk was talking about the product that you were building in terms of helping people and using WhatsApp as a video. That's a gigantic change there. You want to touch a bit on that one?
Sure. Yeah, just taking cue from what Aditi was also saying, I think, and change, and specifically trying to link this to, tech transformations that are happening in companies which are large like OLX. I think the first and foremost is to really define why this change is taking place. I think, is it because the company wants to stay competitive? Is it because user needs are evolving or changing? Or is it just because, you're setting up for forward-looking success and future because maybe you're behind the curve there? And I think at OLX, what was happening was we were largely pivoting from a classified sort of a model, which is probably a lot marketing run. So you throw in money and that's the playbook and it starts to operate on its own, to a more transaction model because consumer needs were changing, competitive scope was also evolving, and which required a more focus on a product-centric approach, right? And I think similar thoughts on what Aditi has. I think the aspect of, how overwhelming this change can be, not just from a culture and people standpoint, but also from a technology and adoption standpoint, can largely get underestimated. Like even with an OLX Group backing of all the kinds of resources you could have from a NASPERS and a ProSUS level with all experts and trainings that you can put through, to get it executed on the ground can be super hard. And I think one thing that we realized, and I'll try and break it into two levels. I think one is really at the top level of management, you do need to take some hard calls. Like, to give you an example, like we were sort of operating in this really decentralized team scope where we had a lot of pockets of, product, tech, design teams operating in all our geographies, more as, teams which are supporting business needs that are coming in, right? Because the sheer size of the team is all that they can do. We took a hard call to say, hey, let's create one center of excellence, or maybe a couple center of excellence, where we can really drive product innovation and change across the board for our users versus having to operate in this particular way. And at the second level is really, to get this adopted and get people motivated to, this new way of working. I think it's really about creating an example. So can you actually take a sample sort of a team or a project and really create a case study out of it, almost do internal product marketing around it, to communicate how it benefits, end-to-end business and users, and really try and replicate that then across the board, piece by piece. So I think those are two levels in which I could sort of classify how some of these changes have, I've learned and worked for us.
That sounds really interesting, because the two stages itself is very important, regardless of the size of your company. And talking about scaling and the speed of scale, and even a case study, Mike, you are a case study yourself, right? Being in Broncos, setting up from a team of 2 to the size that you're at right now, 60 or something, if I'm not mistaken. And previously having to start with other companies, from a team of 1 to 20 to 30. And that's like a whole case study of change that happened. Can you just kind of share a bit, what was that, 2 or 3 learnings that you've gotten from that process?
Great question. So, I mean, one thing to, and I sort of, you have to remember that every single team and every single company is different, right? And ultimately, when it comes to growing teams, is that you're trying to address the needs not only of your customers, right, but of also, the direct internal team that you have, how the company is structured, how the product is structured, what's your business model. And so it's addressing for that. It becomes exponentially more difficult, of course, is when you're going sort of through that hypergrowth phase as well, when you're having to hire fairly aggressively. I was talking to Aditi just yesterday about this, how having to grow in Singapore for Shopify was, it's been a very fast and explosive journey for her. And one thing to note is that, like, as you start bringing people into the team as, part of this change, you have to remember that, you've got one person, that's one brain, right? Then you got 2 people, there's a communication line happening between the 2. Then you add a 3rd person, then you got, communication happening between the 3. And then when you get to the 4th one, that's when the exponential communication lines start to grow, right? And so then when you get from 4 and you go, well, that's not really that many still, because you as a human being, you can understand, like there's this concept called Dunbar's number. If you don't know what it is, go look it up. The idea that your mind is not able to get beyond a certain number of people in a 3-dimensional space, a stereotypical space. It means that, once you get past that number, people just become 2-dimensional objects, and communication starts breaking down. No longer do you refer to that person as, Fred, the product manager, I've been working with him for a while. Now it's the product team and the sales team, and you never refer to individuals anymore. And the empathy starts to decrease, right? Like after that time, that's a battle that you have to go against, which as you get larger quickly.
I think that's great. I mean, empathy is a very key factor. Like as designers, like we are trained to do so, but sometimes it just kicks in with the fact that you're a human being. And scaling and change at work, this is one part of life. There's also scaling and changing in life, where you're growing your own family and your own set of challenges that you're facing there. And this too is one person. All right. I think in case of empathy itself, like I would love to hear it from you guys. Like, how do you kind of use it to stabilize your team? Because change is something that's moving. Change is an energy, right? And this energy can go into multiple directions. How do you use empathy to center it? I'll open it to the floor, to be honest. Let's make it fluid.
Maybe I'll sort of carry on from a little bit from before, because it leads into that. So how do you use empathy? So there comes a point when you can't manage all the people underneath you, right? There's a I've mentioned this talk a few times. It was from a few years ago. Alex Schultz, for the VP of Growth for Facebook. It's a great lecture on growth, right? And he describes how it becomes, it's too difficult to go and micromanage each person, right? And so there comes a point where you have to give autonomy. But when you give autonomy, it means that you need to have empathy as well, because there's an element of trust there. There's also an element of saying, what would I do in their shoes, right? And how would you address pain as that person? So you're teaching by this point principles rather than saying, hey, do this because this is important. And so having that sort of empathetic approach, like understand the problems of your team and how to address it from a more a higher level, right, in order to drive direction without trying too hard to get into the nitty-gritty. And I'm not saying like don't micromanage. There are situations, of course, with certain team members where that has to happen, right? Aditi's laughing because we were talking about this exact thing yesterday. But ultimately, it's like you can't necessarily micromanage, right, every single team member, because guess what? Like they've all got their own hearts, souls, and minds, and ultimately they're trying to solve a problem, and they're probably going to do it differently to you.
Aditi, you want to catch that one?
I just want to.
I feel there's a bit of an energy that's going to come through here.
I just want to add to that. I totally agree. I think trust, and at Shopify we talk about that a lot, which is the trust battery has to be high in the team, especially when like change is happening and lots of stuff is happening, and you can't always know what everyone is working on all the time, or you can't always know everyone's context, like you mentioned, like their personal lives, and you don't know what's going on like with someone most of the time. So having that high trust and assuming that positive intent is so important, to make sure everyone works well together. I do feel though sometimes that the word empathy is kind of overused. Like I see a lot of people talking about empathy, but for me, what matters in the end is the actual action that you do to support your team or help your company change. Like it's easy to talk about it, but when restructuring is happening or when things are like really inconvenient, I feel like that's where your values really show as a leader. Like a lot of companies are like really cool in the easy times, and then the difficult times, like it's like crush time, right? Like so the difficult times also has to be empathetic and caring, because that's how you get a productive team, right? It's good for everyone. So yeah, I think those were the 3 points I wanted to mention, like trust battery, empathy is the two common word, and action, like what you actually do versus what you say, is important.
Cool. I think I like this terminology, trust battery. Can you kind of just explain a bit more?
Yeah, there's this like concept of charging your trust battery, and like when you're new to a team, maybe your trust battery is like 50%, and then you kind of work with people, hang out with them, get to know them, and then charge it up to 100%. And it's the same with like leadership and vice versa as well. Like you should have that high trust, and so if something happens, you have that trust that, okay, this, I may not understand this totally right now, but there must be some thinking that went into it, and then you give people that benefit of doubt and go and investigate and figure it out. Of course, this assumes a lot of autonomy as well, as Mike mentioned. Like I'm assuming a culture of autonomy while I'm talking about the trust battery. It's kind of the culture that I'm used to. I've rarely worked in teams where that isn't already there. So yeah, there's that assumption of autonomy when you talk about trust battery.
I think 3 great points I've gotten out of that, right? Autonomy, trust battery, as well as change and profile. All these 3 things is actually your case study, right? Can you kind of like talk a bit more about the change that you've done with the team, right? Implementing a video-based assessment onto a car battery and that application. And it goes all the way to top management, whereby I'm going to touch to this point, and I think all 4 of us should talk about it. It's governance. How did you do that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just for context for everyone, I think what we're really attempting to do, and maybe not just us, I think a lot of SaaS-based organizations or other competitive organizations are really trying to, in the car buying and selling ecosystems, really relocate. How does this inspection process take place? Does it need to continue to be such an operational 1 hour thing that people need to drive down their cars and go through this? And I think to make that come along as a solution which can be thought through very, very differently, almost consumer first. I think all of these 3 points around trust within the team, autonomy for them to actually operate at a super high level, and have empathy for each other, not for just within the team, but also for the consumers, is a key ingredients to, make them succeed. And I think for us, what's worked till date on what we've been doing with this is that, one, we've definitely let the team be. I think by having some goals which are very set for them in both quantitative and qualitative, let them operate and give them room to experiment. It's okay to fail on a small scale. We have millions of users. It's okay for a few hundred to have a bad experience. We can always come back and salvage that a little bit. But it's good from a pure learning perspective. I think the other thing which on the empathy side, this is more internal, which has really worked, which Aditi was also hinting with, which I feel adds to the trust battery as well. Can you take people along and not really look at them from just their expertise within a function? Like, for example, I've had, product and design folks which come in and bring only the technology folks along once the Jira ticket is actually ready to say, hey, this is what you need to code and deliver. Um, there's so much lost before that in terms of inputs, people getting onboarded, actually feeling for the consumer. For specifically things where you're trying to do all these big changes, it's important to bring people along from the word go, and it could be small and small. But I've noticed it's so much smooth sailing afterwards versus you trying to convince so many people at the same point in time later on. And I think the thumb rule that I've noticed in these meetings happen is when people start answering for each other. Like, there's a question on design but a product person answers, and there's a question on product but a tech person answers, and there's like vice versa. And that you really know that people feel for each other and they know what they're really building. So those are some of the things which have really helped us craft this team well. Just, I think, on the last bit on internal empathy, I think while I think COVID has been a big challenge, and I know I'm using a virtual background myself right now, but this sneak peek into each other's homes with no virtual backgrounds has helped build so much personal empathy, trust, understanding of what this person is really about. And I think those
Oh
things,
yeah.
yeah. And I encourage so many people, if you're not doing that, at least once in a while, have the camera on versus talking to a black box with a name, and do see what the other person is all about.
Definitely. I've run meetings with teams and stakeholders where all of a sudden my daughter just jumps in and starts mimicking my movement, like the hands and the mouth and stuff. And here I am trying to control, a straight face. But it is what it is. We're living in a very different world. We're managing our own change, right? And it's crazy. I mean, there's a couple of factors. I think the point that I was trying to kind of push to the panel is governance, right? So, Praful, you were talking about how you kind of let people into the team, let them make the mistakes and support that, right? I think that it's amazing. And Aditi, we're talking about the trust battery. Again, we're seeing the same theme here. And Mike, your recent talk was about the North Star. How does North Star govern this? And what's your point of view in terms of governing teams?
Yeah, for sure. And this sort of really bakes in from Aditi and some of the comments that Praful was making before as well. But really, it's that idea to drive towards a common metric of success, right? And as a company, you have a vision. Well, I hope you do. And if you don't, then figure that out. It will help. But ultimately, that North Star metric, which is sort of an amalgamation of a couple of metrics, helps drive sort of the decision making that happens within not just the product team, or the UX team or whoever. It's to drive the organization forward, in which famously called OKRs, or you can call it goals, or you can call it cascading steps, whatever you want to call it. But the ultimate idea is that when you get the situation where you've got this North Star metric that people are driving towards. For example, at Brancas, we have each team now they're the cross-functional teams, which have their own individual North Star because they're solving different problems compared to each other, right? But they also know that their North Star has to tie to the company one, right? And then they have goals, quarterly goals, so 3 goals per team, right? And you know, they have steps to execute that as well. And so what that means is that it's never like, oh, okay, decide on the roadmap and I'm going to tell you the priorities and what's coming up next. It's please figure it out, because ultimately that's the metric that we need to hit. And if you don't, that's when there's going to be a problem. But hey, I'm going to give you autonomy in order to get there. Oh, but like, if we're going to align this with like what is our, you know, vision and what we're trying to drive as a business, then that's the thing that you have to hit. But how, I don't care how you build the rocket ship, just figure out how to build the rocket ship, right?
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, figure it out and move along and learn from the mistakes. But I mean, like, see, we're talking about Southeast Asia, right? We're talking about traditionally embedded design principles, not design, but business principles. We're talking about conglomerates. We're talking about even in Asia in general. I mean, this autonomy given to the team is fairly new and fairly interesting. I don't know, just give me some point of views of this. Like, I mean, like, what have you experienced? And is it important for us to have experts leading experts in moments of, you know, change management?
Yeah, maybe just maybe I'll just add to what Mike was saying. I think, yeah, and I think drill down to what Mike was trying to elaborate with the North Star is focus. Because with autonomy, a lot of the time what could happen is you could spread yourself thin and try and, you know, do a lot, which again is setting up for almost like a false negative or a failure. Really articulating the North Star and taking the time to articulate the North Star first. And also, like I was saying in my talk also, was that really defining the problem well. Because a lot of the time, I think defining the problem is not something that we spend a lot of time on. It's about, hey, let's just get started and start executing on solutioning. Just those two, I think, give this razor sharp focus to the team to, hey, this is the direction you need to go to. Anything outside of it, you have autonomy to say no to. And I think that is where leadership needs to also back that up by making sure that you're almost creating like a filter or a backup to say, hey, these are other things that the team is probably not going to get distracted by. I think that's sort of a governance, and then holding the team really accountable and responsible for driving towards the results. I think that creates a good governance environment in terms of making sure are we proceeding in the right direction. And then your classic, you know, I think a lot of the time what happens is that ball get dropped and then you just pick it up after 6 months or 3 months or 6 weeks to say, hey, where are we all of a sudden? Like, how do we create these regular rhythms of making sure that we are taking stock of are we headed in the right direction or not? Really creates this environment of autonomy and responsibility that the team can really benefit of.
I think we're hitting a really good note here. We have a question from Christiana. I believe there are many challenges in creating that trust with new people and teams that have developed from working remotely. I think this is a key phrase here, working remotely. Like, what kind of activities and or communication have you done to raise that trust? What do you guys think?
I could answer that. So there, in terms of culture stuff and remote, we do a lot of things to help connect people. I would say that our team in Southeast Asia and Asia in general is a bit better at remote because we were doing it before COVID. And our team is spread across like Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Indonesia, and India. So it's like a lot of time zones already. And that gives us a lot of good practice. So one thing that we do, for example, like fun stuff is, you know, Friday hangouts, or another thing that we do is we have like a 90s, like in olden days, like 90s chat room where in the morning everyone logs in and says good morning. And then at the end of the day, like people are like, okay, I'm signing off now. So that gives that feeling of being in a room together, like in a virtual room, but it's still a room. You know, people say, okay, I'm gonna go cook lunch now. Like, this is true, totally true, by the way. It's amazing, and it gives that like warm feeling. The other thing that we try to do a couple of times is secret Santa like lunches. So that is, you don't know who delivered your lunch to you. It's like randomized within the team. And so it could be hilarious because somebody could do something terrible and send you food that you don't like, or it could be something amazing as well. So I think that there are a lot of ways that you can like create that real bond within the team remotely. And I hate to say this, but autonomy is really important as well. Like if somebody is micromanaging you remotely, and there's no clear vision, like as Praful was mentioning, like having that vision, and as Mike mentioned, that North Star is really important. Any communication problems become 100 times worse in remote. So having that clarity is very important.
That's very nice. Nicely put. We have a couple more minutes left. I think I'm just going to give like a couple of seconds to each and one of you to kind of tell me what you think about agile and change management. Like the word agile has been thrown around everywhere with anything. Just a point of view. What do you guys think? Change management and agile. We have silence.
No,
Go ahead.
nobody wants to go first. Let me take a stab. No, I think yeah, just one line on that. I think agile is a means to the end. I think a lot of times it's considered that, hey, I'm agile and I'm going to be successful now. As an organization, as a team, not going to work unless you really figure out the principles of agile. So I encourage people to actually read the Agile Manifesto every now and then to actually go back to what it really means. And the second is like, the process should work for you, not the other way around. I think a lot of times what we get caught up in is following the process. Just as an example, if I may share, we do these 2-week sprint, and I think there's a production issue and say, hey, it can only go after 2 weeks because I'm following an agile process. That's just plain stupid in my view. I think if things are breaking, we need to break the process and make it a 1-week sprint and get things out or get it out immediately. So I think those are some of the things. So don't take agile as the silver bullet to solving everything is going to be my view.
That's a great view. Mike?
I mean, there's the agile concept, right, in product development and software development. But you can kind of, like the iterative approach, you can apply to teams in change management as well, to be completely honest, which is actually exactly what we did at Brankas over the past year. You know, we went into 2020 going, okay, we got these products that have got planned. You know, we need to grow the team. I had literally put plan down after I had joined the company, and then COVID hit, and all of a sudden that thrown out the window. So, oh, okay, right, like
it's agile time.
It's agile time. Respond to the market, right? Figure out what needs to be done. Okay, we need to change these roles. Who do we have here? Budgets come down, so we need to figure out who's inside the company that can actually help. It's all of that type of stuff. So you sort of ears on the ground, listen to the market, listen to the problems for your team and the rest of the company, and iterate. Like that's, you know, what we do, and it's worked. It's worked so far for us. So, and I'm sure we're going to go through another iteration in about 3 to 4 months from now. So,
or a couple of weeks time.
Or a couple of weeks time. So just any of my team members on the call, just warning you in advance.
I think agile is great as a concept, but sometimes there's too many meetings. And so, especially for a team where everyone is like high in the craft and just wants to do the work, let them do the work. And so I think it's very important to iterate on the process and remove meetings and minimize that time needed to do the rituals. I think you can try to go post-agile if possible, like don't get dragged down by like too many stand-ups or whatever. You know, check with your team whether it makes sense anymore, and if everyone is cool, like just delete stand-ups. I don't know if it's okay to say this, but yeah, like let people just work and get that half an hour or 15 minutes back in their day. Yeah,
it's great. Wow. We're about to run out of time. I'll just kind of tie things together from the conversation and repeat back to the audience. Kind of, we've talked about change management as being about people, less about process and more about people. And people will require some empathy, right, for us to understand where they're at, the situation, especially in this unprecedented times that we're in. You know, they're at home with their families and working and crunching spreadsheets and stuff and timelines and Gantt charts that they're looking at, trying to hit the time. But we often need to kind of be a little bit more agile in terms of how we work together, how we kind of help one another and build upon each other. I think that's a very important thing. And with that, I really want to thank each and every one of you, Aditi, Praful, and Mike, for joining me on this panel. And I hope you enjoyed me hosting it. And thank you so much.